Caelen obviously is the founder and CEO of WhatClinic. Prior to that, he was head of product with Nube Technologies, and prior to that, he was with Baltimore Technologies here in Dublin. So, with WhatClinic, they basically invented the sector for medical treatments in terms of directories and listings and ratings and reviews. So it's going to be really interesting to get a sense of how he has built that company up over the last 8 years. So I'd like to welcome Caelen onto the stage. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, much appreciated. I'm looking around and going, everyone's very young. Then I have to remember, no, they're not young. You're old. It's great to see everyone here. Thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Justify yourself being here this evening. What brings you here, and tell us a little bit about WhatClinic.
Hey, first, I don't like to think I can justify myself being here, but I can tell you a little bit about WhatClinic, so I'll start from that perspective. So WhatClinic's WhatClinic's a marketplace, much the same way that eBay is a marketplace. Effectively, we bring two disparate groups together and provide the necessary services and information to allow them to transact business. And in our case, that happens to be medical treatment. And so the problem we're trying to solve is we're trying to solve the friction that exists within a patient who is looking for a particular form of treatment and a provider that provides that treatment. And that friction in our marketplace is everywhere. It's amazing just how much friction exists in this marketplace, even from the simplest terms of just trying to provide the providers who deliver a particular service, through to what the price of that service is, through to what sort of quality you can expect from the customer care, to the actual quality of the individual surgeon, and when you can get treated. All of that is just difficult to provide in this space. And so really we're trying to solve quite a hard problem, and to make it more difficult, we're trying to solve it for hundreds of millions of people at the same time.
Okay, so tell us about those hundreds of millions of people, right? Because let's talk a little bit about the scale that you've achieved. You serve how many million customers a year, and what jurisdictions?
Well, the numbers are big. However, probably a lot of time it's easy to get focused upon the big numbers, and a lot of time those big numbers are vanity numbers and don't actually really impact upon the business per se. But on a given year, around about 15 to 20 million people use our services in some way, shape or form. And on a given day, around 10,000 people use it in depth. We'd have maybe 60 or 70 or 80,000 use it in a non-in-depth way, but we deliver some kind of meaningful value to around 10,000 people every day. Okay. But they're nice numbers.
So to bring it back a little bit, talk about a use case here for this, right? So who's your average user, and what are they doing with the site? Because you're kind of talking about solving hard problems. What's that hard problem that you're solving?
Well, that's the first bit. There is no user. When you're talking about 20 million people a year, right, each of who has their own individual problems, and each belongs to their own demographic, and we work in 30 different countries, you don't really have a sweet spot patient per se. Realistically, our consumer is everyone, because everyone in this room at some stage will be looking for medical treatment in some way, shape or form. Everyone will be wondering how much something costs. Everyone will be wondering what level of care they're going to get. Everyone's going to be wondering when they're going to get treated. And yet everyone in this room, actually you all belong to one demographic. But if the room was bigger and we had more people, we'd have more than one demographic. So that's the first challenge. The first challenge is there isn't a sweet spot patient. There is a sweet spot clinic as far as we're concerned.
Okay,
though.
they're easier to define,
they're
right?
far easier to define, okay. Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we deal in the healthcare sector, and the healthcare sector is an old sector, very old sector,
Second oldest profession, right?
I believe so, yes.
I hear.
Actually, when I was starting up the business, I was looking at different industries that the internet could revolutionize. I was taking a very top-down approach in a kind of intellectual exercise. In other words, head up my own arsehole. But anyway, a very top-down approach looking at different industries that the internet could revolutionize. And I started at the world's largest industry, said, right, energy, what can the internet do? My knowledge of energy was, you turn on the switch, the light comes on. and having absolutely no domain knowledge, I could think of no way that the internet could revolutionize energy. It probably can do it, I'm just not the right person to do it. I then looked at healthcare, and my dad was a dentist, set up practice in the Middle East, set up practice in Bermuda, set up practice in Hong Kong. So I kind of had that within my DNA and my background. And actually I'd had some difficulty getting healthcare when I was abroad as well. So I kind of liked that idea, but I allowed myself then to look at other sectors as well. And I looked then at legal. And when it came to legal, I kind of realized, hold on a second now, this really is an old sector. People pass judgment who are wearing dead horsehair on their head. This is going to be really, really difficult to innovate because of the great big sucking sound that all the vested interest has. It'd be almost impossible to change systems. And I thought that, okay, well, healthcare has to be easier than that. So I started in on healthcare. But the truth is that the vested interests are huge in healthcare. The number of really powerful groups that are so heavily invested in keeping things the way they are, there's an awful lot of practices around the world that would happily roll back the internet and have things back the way that they were before. So it's quite clear to us that the businesses that we want to work with are the progressive businesses, the businesses that actually want to change the way that healthcare runs, the businesses that want to deliver better customer care and better healthcare to their consumers. And they're the people that do well for us, and we do well for them.
So we haven't had a business in here yet, or a company in here yet that has touched consumer as directly as you do. So you're talking about like 10,000 customers do something meaningful on the site
every day
on a day. You must have a really interesting insight into health trends and sort of like national interests in terms of like, okay, so what kind of like what's the most popular treatment that's searched for in Ireland?
You just love me to say breast augmentation.
I want to
like
hear
that,
you say something really obscure here and slightly embarrassing for half of the audience.
It's unfortunately.
What's the weirdest thing someone searched for on the site?
I think someone once wanted to get a toe removed to be like their wife, who also had a toe removed. I thought that was pretty weird. But no, in fairness, you look at, it's very easy to sensationalize healthcare, respective elective healthcare, especially cosmetic surgery. But the truth of the matter is that the vast majority of people who want elective healthcare done just want to feel normal. And, one of the most common things, really boring stuff like tattoo removal, and the bulk of plastic surgery are people removing birthmarks, stuff that to be honest, the number of 22-year-olds who are looking to become some kind of model by enhancing their body is such a tiny, tiny portion of things. The vast bulk of people just want to feel like normal people. And so it's not really, you can make sensational stories out of it pretty easy. In fact, I'm pretty sure our PR department does make sensational stories out of it here and there.
Good, they're here.
But the truth is, the bulk of it is pretty normal, pretty boring.
It was a really boring answer. I really was hoping for something more sensations. How do you make money?
So we make money by charging the clinic for priority listing. So unlike most other kind of marketplaces, we don't have a pay-to-play. So we will list every single clinic that is willing to offer service to the patient, whether they pay us or not. We'll just prioritize in the listing the people who are willing to pay us. But to the extent where we'll never put something, well, we'll try really hard, never is a big word, we'll try really hard not to put something inappropriate in front of someone.
Okay.
So if an individual clinic doesn't provide the exact treatment that you're looking for, we won't try and substitute in a treatment or substitute in a geography or substitute in something that you aren't actually looking for. But effectively, at the end of the day, what we'd like to get to a situation, which obviously we never will, the ideal scenario is everyone in our marketplace is paying us, and that we're treating them all the same without any discrimination across the board. The truth is, though, that there will always be an element of the marketplace that's more progressive than the other elements.
So, I mean, as I was saying in the intro, you sort of invented the category because you did this in 2007. You built a marketplace that's, available for directories and listing, ratings and reviews. And there wasn't something like that in the space at the time. So when somebody like Yelp, who try and do something not dissimilar for every business, came along, how did you feel?
I didn't really notice Yelp, to tell you the truth. I mean, we were always very vertically focused. We didn't really look to the left and look to the right. And kind of give you an idea, the healthcare industry is around a $2 trillion marketplace. It's second only to energy. The elective healthcare is a $500 billion marketplace. It's a big marketplace. If that's not a big enough marketplace for you, okay. And so, a $500 billion marketplace is big enough for us, and we always recognize that it's impossible to do a job in depth and be horizontal at the same time. So Yelp is trying to be horizontal, trying to be all things to all people, and there's absolutely a place for that. But when you start looking at specialized services, so when eventually there becomes a marketplace for lawyers and the dead horsehair on people's head, it won't be a Yelp that solves that problem. It will be someone who has a lot of domain knowledge in the legal sector who goes in and solves that for the legal sector.
So you chose not to focus, as you say, left and right, and you said, let's build up our experience, and we've got the expertise in this vertical. Did you, because your background is big enterprise, and we'll talk a little bit about your background, but you came from a big enterprise world. Did you at some point say, let's double down on healthcare, and not only am I going to provide the front end funneling for the clinics where all the patients are coming in, I'm going to do their booking engine, I'm going to do their calendaring, I'm going to do their everything, sort of get in and be pervasive.
You make it sound also clean, and the truth is, this is a startup grind. This is a startup grind, and there's no better example of grind than the company that we've done. Decisions never came easy. The decision was easy. The decision was easy, but the implementation of that decision was never easy. It was always fraught with problems. There was never that nice, clean, hit the baseball with the middle bit of the wood where it goes thwack and the ball just clears the field. That moment never happened. Every time it was kind of like the ball skirted off the back. You just about made it to first base, and you just stood there waiting for another opportunity. So no, there was no moment like that. There was no aha moment where it was gradual discovery, continual experimentation, a lot of pain, a lot of grind, consistently making mistakes, but making those mistakes relatively cheaply, retreating from those mistakes and trying again, and eventually moving things forward and inching things forward. Occasionally, you got a decent chunk forward, but then go back into the grind. The truth is, healthcare is incredibly fragmented. One solution for one demographic in one country isn't another solution for another country. So the similarities between fertility in Greece and cosmetic surgery in London are almost non-existent. The calendaring systems they use, the currency they use, everything has changed, everything is quite different. So we make and we win in sectors little bit by little bit by little bit. I didn't think it was going to be this difficult when I started, by the way. I thought we were going to develop one nice, clean, big solution and then scale it to bejesus. That didn't pan out too well, though. And I think that's going to be true where you're looking at disrupting existing businesses with a lot of vested interest, where you're not replacing the services, where you're working in tandem with those services. I think no matter when the legal profession is eventually conquered, I think it will be the same for the legal profession.
Sure. You're slightly underselling yourself, though, in terms of what you've achieved by saying that it's been, you never got that satisfying thwack and moving forward. 8 years down the road.
Oh, don't remind me.
No, I know. Hang on. It gets better. 8 years down the road, you survived a global financial crash. You have 70 employees or more at this stage?
There were 65 people in Dublin and then another 30 people in the Philippines.
Okay, so you have achieved quite an amount in that time. How are you measuring success
Yes.
along the way? You know, and do you say at this point that WhatClinic is a successful company?
We're a successful startup. We've just started to become a business.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think we have graduated from the startup class. Not a long time, maybe a couple of years out of the startup class. So we're a successful startup. But I'm glad you bring up that thing of how do you measure success. A lot of people say it is a success. And my answer to them is anyone who starts up a business starts up with a goal in mind. And for some people that may be a monetary outcome. Some people may look to trade sale for 100 million and retire. Some people may want to change the world. Some people may want to revolutionize an industry. And success is achieving that goal, right? And you know, you're not a success until you achieve the goals that you set out to be. So in no way do I regard our business as being successful.
Let's talk about the context of that, though, right? Because your previous career history informs huge amounts of that, right? So
Yeah.
Baltimore listed on NASDAQ while you were there.
Yeah, that became my reality. I thought that's the way startups went. You used to form the startup, 3 years later you're worth $9 billion. That's what I thought was normal.
Then you took a step down to the small company that was Nubay that was acquired by RIM, right? So
yeah,
your context for success is going to be different.
When you grow up, I grew up in the Middle East. A lot of people say, was that weird growing up in the Middle East? And I go, no, it was normality. Because it was my normality. That was my context. Nothing was strange about it. Nothing was unusual about it. And so my first real formative experience in technology, actually my second formative experience was Baltimore Technologies. Joined that when it was around 25 people. Around 3 years later, it was 2,000 employees. It was worth $9 billion. And I was so bought in. I totally believed it. Like I drunk the Kool-Aid and more. If I could tell you how naive I was at that time, it was just ridiculous. But anyway, as far as I was concerned, that's the way you ran business. You raised a load of money, and when you ran out of money, you raised more, and you kept on batting. And if you were successful, you IPO'd on the NASDAQ and you were worth $9 billion, and that was my bar. So when I finished up in Nubay, I took a year off, went traveling for the world, got a phone call from Paddy Houlihan, who I'd worked with in Baltimore, saying I'm starting a startup. I was in Bolivia at the time. He said, come home. I said, no. When I came home, he still hired me, and that was Nubay Software. And, in retrospect, Nubay Software did well from day one. It was solving problems for mobile network operators and trying to reduce churn, but it deployed out to, while I was there, networks in total, maybe 50 million active subscribers that was using software in some way, shape or form. And the company was doing well, but I didn't see how it could ever get to a $9 billion valuation. So that was a bit of a disappointment. Now, in the end of the day, it sold off to RIM and sold very well. And I believe, Paddy's on my board. He looks happier than he's ever looked before. So I've got to presume it was some kind of good exit.
Tell me, I'm always curious about how people introduce themselves. And when you started WhatClinic 8 years ago, you were the founder and CEO, and there was probably maybe one of you at that stage, right? So that's interesting. And now you still introduce yourself as founder and CEO of WhatClinic, and you have 70, 80 staff. What's changed for you as founder and CEO during that time? Because I presume you're not doing the same stuff as you were 8 years ago. So what does being CEO mean, and what do you assume people know when you introduce yourself as a CEO to?
Well, what does CEO mean? Being CEO means less than you think it means. Probably all worked in a company where some key member of staff threatens to leave or leaves, and there's some kind of panicked meeting of what on earth are we going to do when Keith leaves. He knows the entire of the system. No one else knows the entire of the system. And then Keith leaves and walks out the door. and it's never as bad as you think it's going to be. The company just got on fine after Keith left. It's not that Keith I'm thinking of, by the way. And you've got to say, well, if that's true for everyone else, if that's true for everyone else, then it's probably true for you too. So I think everyone should rightfully have two fears about when they're running a company. One, the first fear is if you get run over by a bus tomorrow, the first fear is that the company won't do very well and will sink beneath the waves because it's your expertise that's holding the whole thing together. And the other fear, which is a lot more insidious, is maybe it will do better. So at the start, you're just trying to hold everything together with string. Now, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get proper business processes put in place. And, personally, I find it incredible that the same skill set resides within the same person. So it's kind of unfortunate that we're in the environment whereby a CEO, as they move forward through the cycle of a startup, has to learn everything by making mistakes. Now, there's loads of people who will give you invaluable advice. Well, it would be invaluable if you took the advice. But for the most part, I found myself and nearly every other CEO I've ever met has to make the mistakes for themselves. And so that's kind of an unfortunate situation, is that you make the mistakes, you learn, you move forward, even when there's people to the left telling you what's the right thing to do.
Can we talk a little bit about the genesis of WhatClinic, the days after Newbay, just to give us a bit of a picture of where you were as founder and CEO, making mistakes left, right, and centre, because those early days are like that. But describe those early days.
Actually, the early days, that was within my core competence.
Okay.
I would make far less mistakes in the early days.
Okay.
It's when you start scaling a business into and looking at things that you have literally had no experience with. When you're talking about putting in an organizational structure across a business that's going to operate pretty well over multiple time zones and multiple geographies. And you're going, when's the last time I implemented an organizational theory? Like, how do I spell organizational theory? And you realize you just don't have a clue about it, and you have to really learn it from first principles. And
do you? Why bring that on yourself? I mean, do you not say somebody somewhere knows this better than me? And
yeah, absolutely. You go, someone there knows it better than you, but that person has no domain expertise. So that person doesn't know how your business operates. And bear in mind, your business is changing how it operates pretty much on a day-by-day basis, because it's a fast-moving business. They have no idea of the personalities of the people involved. They have no idea of the history of the people involved. So you can take that advice, but all advice has to be taken within the context in which it's given. So if you're listening to me and you're trying to take a lesson from my experience, right, and apply it in a different context, don't. Because my experience is relevant within the context that it happened in the first place. You can't take generalized lessons and just move them from context to context and expect the same outcome. You won't get the same outcome. You'll get radically different outcomes.
You should still come to Startup Grind to learn from people who are here, right? Don't do that. Go back a second, and you started talking about, you didn't start talking about it. Tell me about the genesis.
Did I go on a tangent?
Slightly.
Shocking.
Tell me, tell me about those days after leaving Newbay. You discounted energy because you didn't get it. You focused on health. What happened then? How did you get a product?
Hired a developer from Brazil. Great guy, still with us.
Cool.
And within 2 months, we had our product. I think it's called minimal viable product these days. It wasn't a minimal viable product. It wasn't viable. But, it's what we claimed was a product. And I flew off to a trade show in Singapore. The sector we were going to focus on initially was medical tourism. And the reason we were focused on medical tourism as the first sector is when a health clinic is trying to attract patients from abroad, they have to use the internet. Whereas local clinics, bear in mind, this is 8 years ago, it was almost a different lifetime. Local clinics didn't have to use the internet. So we knew what the first marketplace was going to be, because they had to embrace the internet in order to do it, and we were going to be internet based. So I flew off to a medical tourism conference in Singapore, and we plugged it and just went around talking to every single hospital, every single clinic. I think we signed up around 20 of those clinics on the basis of the non-viable product that we had. Had paper contracts that people signed, like actual paper contracts, collected hard signatures, and we found there was great appetite there amongst the suppliers, and that really buoyed us, and got the product to genuinely to minimum viable product. And this must have been around about 5 months into the company, and then we earned our first euro. Actually, it was 10 euros we earned. We spent 400 euros that night celebrating. I remember being really excited about the first 10 euros we processed.
You should have kept it. I presume it was actually paid.
No, we spent it that night, you know. After 390 euros, we spent the final tenner.
How did you fund the business for those initial 5 months? So tell us about your fundraising activities, which you'd never done before, right? You thought that money came from NASDAQ in barrel loads. So.
I was involved in fundraising in Newbay.
Okay.
You know, wasn't responsible for it by any stretch of imagination. So I knew how to spell VC. Pretty easy, isn't it? And I was fundraising before I set up the company in 2006, and you got to bear in mind the country was awash with money back in those days. You know, it was just flooding everywhere. It's a different world to fundraising today, and to be completely honest, it was easier for me to raise money in 2006 with no product, no team, no premises, no company, than it would be for me to raise money today with large revenue, actual business, staff. Yeah. So a completely different world for raising money. I had a lot of experience with technology. My experience in Baltimore Technologies, I was with, realistically, there was only a few handful of people that had the level of experience that I would have in being involved at the start of a startup and getting it to a point where it was valuable. So I found it incredibly easy to raise money. In fact, we'd raised 650,000 and had that money in the bank before the company was founded, without any employees. I still had 6 months notice to run on my employment contract before I could even set up the company. And I think back at that, and those days, I think of what the reality is today and how difficult it is to raise funds today. It's almost impossible to raise funds now without a product. We had 5 pages of a business plan that no one read.
Why did you do it? Because you weren't fired from Newbay or anything close to it, right?
Should have been. No, I'm joking.
What was the driver there? So
I always wanted to set up my own business. To be honest, I can't remember why, but I always did, for sure. And Newbay was very tough. Yeah, Newbay was tough. Actually, if our company's a grind, Newbay was double grind. It was grind. Kind of give you an impression, Newbay was selling mission critical software to network operators. By the time I left, I think we're around 40 or 50 employees. And when you're selling mission critical software and you're supporting that software to Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, O2, it burns you. It burns really bad. There was one stage I threw my SIM card into the Liffey That's a true story. My boss rang me up afterwards. Well, I rang my boss and said, "That's it, I've had enough." And he fielded the calls for the night. And he rang me up the next day and said, "I think you need to take some time off." That was a large part of me kind of realizing, okay, I'll go set up my own. I always want to set up my own business, but it can't be any worse than this, that's for sure.
So you started out with 6 months of salary and 650.
Oh no, that lasted more than 6 months.
Right, okay. No, but I mean, when you decided you were going, you had heaps of cash in the bank. You were building a product. At the time, there wasn't, these really, I suppose what you call them, like, incredibly sexy co-working spaces where every tech startup in the city wants to go and hang out and be a cool startup.
Yeah.
So
I hate that idea.
I know. So I'm asking you, right? So there wasn't that culture and environment there when you started bringing in employees.
Yeah.
So how did you attract people in to an unsexy startup in an unsexy environment, and how did you start building a culture there that would retain them?
So I'll hit kind of a few points here, and it might go on, so you might need to guide me as I answer it. So I'm sick to the death of hearing startups, or successful startups actually, people who've exited and have forgotten what it's all like because they've got 200 billion in the bank or something like that.
I hate those people.
Oh, I tell you. But that same old statement of just hire A players, only hire A players, if they're not an A player, then forget it, you aren't going to go anywhere. Well, as a scrappy startup, guess what? A players don't want to work with you. You got to work with whoever you can, whoever will work with you, and it's your job to provide the environment to allow them to excel in their job. So, your first-class graduates, PhDs, they're not going to work for a scrappy startup who's working in an office that has mold growing through the wall, where you have to stoop over to take a piss in the one toilet that's shared between the other offices. And that, by the way, is true. Because they can get real jobs and they have real mortgages that, and they're not going to be looking in your bank account in 6 months' time wondering whether they're going to make their mortgage or not. So the truth is, it's not so much how do you get the right talent in, it's how do you provide the right environment and how do you put in the right culture to allow them to do a great job. And that's what we've tried to focus on. We've tried to focus on an environment whereby, and I think we've provided an environment that's quite different to a lot of startups. We deliberately gone a bit old school. 9 to 5:30 culture. Come in at 9, work really hard, and leave at 5:30. And we achieve that. And we get a good energy going during the day. And that works. You know who that works really well for? That works really well for parents. So we have, with that kind of working culture, we have a demographic of employee that suits us very, very well. Sure, we don't have double fudge chocolate Danishes, but you are gone at 5:30 to pick your kid up for the creche. And that has given us the edge to be able to attract a particular category of employee.
Have you sat in personally on every hire?
Up until around a year ago. At that stage, my senior management team had absorbed what I was looking for.
Okay. What is that? What is that in interview, and what is that in the first 10 days?
Okay, I'd love to say I had it right, by the way. I didn't. I still made horrifically hiring mistakes. In fact, the most painful decisions I've ever made in my entire life have been hiring mistakes. If you ever go and hire any kind of number of people, it will be the most painful mistakes that you ever make. I can tell you the biggest mistake I make The biggest mistake I make is I get blinded by someone's talent, and that blinds me to the cultural non-fit. And every time it comes and it bites you in the ass, and it causes so much damage. The number one thing that doesn't work for us is an inability to work in a team, in particular negativity, blame, undermining other employees. That's just so destructive. I really can't emphasize how destructive it is and how emotionally draining it is to deal with those issues. If you can, as I said, I keep making this mistake, but really desperately try not to be blinded by just talent and experience, and look at, is this person going to work in the team that we have? Because if it doesn't work, it's just so painful.
When you look around and you try and compare yourself against like direct competitors for talent, but also companies that you aspire WhatClinic to be like, who's in that space? Who do you steal your talent from?
That would be telling, wouldn't it? So talent comes from everywhere. So it's not that we target we don't target particular companies for talent. What we target is a demographic. So, tell you the truth, if you're a developer and you've just had your first kid, give us a call. That's who we're looking for, because we know that we can provide a good working environment that's going to meet your requirements, and it's going to meet our requirements, and you'd be working with people who have the same requirements and an understanding of what your requirements are. Doesn't mean that you don't work hard. You do work hard, but you really focus on it while you're in work. Work is work, and home is home. So we go very broad. We use recruiters. We use we have a recruiter sponsoring this, don't we?
We do, yeah.
I should say nothing then.
Probably not.
Okay. We use the best, of course, is personal recommendations. We use every kind of service that you can. You have to cast your net very, very wide.
I'm going to take us on an entirely different track now, away from company culture and hiring and stuff. It's good, but let's move slightly to scaling a technology business from a commercial perspective. So you sell software as a service. This is a SaaS business. What are the lessons you've learned over 8 years, particularly around pricing? Because that's a really, really difficult one, but it's so key to your growth, right? So what's that been like for you?
Company gets to any kind of size and any kind of success at all, in particular when you're trying to scale it. I think there's only really two levers that senior management has that has an immediate impact upon the business. And the first lever is sales compensation. You change sales compensation, you change behavior almost instantaneously, and the super tanker starts to shift direction. And the second one is pricing. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of pricing. And if you spend an hour every month examining your pricing and trying to work out how to move it north or move it south and gain more market share, that's probably going to be the best hour you spend every month. My kind of experience with, in particular, Irish startups is they undervalue. Sorry, that's the wrong word. They exaggerate the importance of price in what the cost is for the customer.
Yeah.
So, we commonly think that price equals cost, but from someone buying your product, especially say a B2B product, well, they've got to train their staff, they've got to change the way they work, they've got to have support, they may have to buy an equipment. You know, I think studies have been done on CRM systems, that the price of a CRM system is only around 10% of the cost of implementation. And so the focus is, well, let's get the price down really low, but if the rest of the cost is remaining static, then the impact you're having is very, very small. Whereas the opposite is true for your business, is your business is incredibly sensitive to that price. So let's say you have a 10% profit margin and a price of 100, you raise that price to 200, all of a sudden you've got a big profit margin. So common perception is as well is that the lower you make your price, the more market share you're going to get. But for most companies, that's actually not true, because if you bring your price down, you don't have the resources to spend to go out there and get the market. To be honest, I think the whole SaaS-based model has got better at that, and pricing now is more and more realistic in the SaaS space than it used to be around 6 or 7 years ago. But really see it in companies that aren't confident in their value proposition. They go out there with a price that's just far too low, and it doesn't matter to the customer whether you're charging them $10 a month or $100 a month, because you're solving a big enough problem. Solve a big enough problem, you can charge a reasonable price for that problem.
Have you any examples of you know, either new territories or new market segments that you went into and got that entirely wrong?
So, you know, we largely charge on similar to Google, on a bidding model.
Okay.
But we have price discrepancies for ostensibly the same product, but I think around 5,000% differences in different marketplaces. But we let the market set the price. So one market will pay literally 50 times what another market will pay for ostensibly the same product. And yeah, and how do you price? How do you price in that environment? It's really tough to actually price, and we decided long ago not to. We moved away from us pricing around 3 years ago.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Coming hyper local and sort of like looking at recent events, we obviously had the the budget announcements there in the last couple of weeks. And I think that there was a great sense of disappointment amongst the local community about the bits of it that directly related to the tech startup community. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think among the startup community, the more vocal members of the startup community, that all the hand waviness is about capital gains. And the fact that we got 33% capital gains. In the budget it was reduced down to 20% for the first $1 million that you earned. For me personally, that's irrelevant. It's a quality problem. It's a Maserati problem. When I'm rich, what color will my Maserati be? To be honest, I don't think that any potential entrepreneur is going to be put off by capital gains tax of 33%. I think if you're going to set up a business, you're going to set up a business, and you won't really be put off by whether it's 33%, 25%, 24%. At the end of the day, you know, I think it's wrong to resent any form of kind of taxation. There's a load wrong with the tax system that really irritate me, but they're all on the bottom side.
That's another day's conversation. You're not going there.
Oh, damn.
There's two other areas that I think are of interest, right? And I think I'd like your opinion on the two of them, right? So the first one is the lack of incentive for investors to, particularly at an early stage, angel investing stage, to put money into early stage startups, particularly when you compare it to the UK. and you do an awful lot of advisory work at the moment with startups. You meet one a week, you said, right? So you must see that as a problem. And then the second thing is, there is not the same type of incentives for employers to offer options in the company to senior employees that they try to steal away from possibly our hosts. So what do you think on those things?
Certainly the angel and well, I've got two thoughts on the angel investment. One of them is my own personal belief, and the other one is me sitting as a CEO of a startup, and they're actually two entirely contradictory things. You know, my own personal belief is, why should anyone be getting tax relief on anything? But you know, that's beside the point for this conversation. We live in the real world, and the real world is that UK startups and Irish startups largely compete for the same dollar from investment perspective, and we have to live in that real world. In an idealized world, as I kind of said, everyone pays their tax and no one moans about it. Actually, no one moans, but you know, let me moan about that for a bit. But unfortunately, the real world is we have to compete with the UK, and taxation is one of the areas in which we compete. And we aggressively compete in other areas of taxation, very aggressively compete in other areas of taxation. And the fact that if we don't compete in tax relief for angel investors as aggressively as the UK is competing on it, then it's a signal from the government that it's not important.
And then the second one on the employers offering that as a benefit, as an incentive.
It's the bitty stuff which is really irritating there, to tell you the truth. So it's the tax treatment if someone decides to vest and hold, where they have to pay their income tax on their stock options, despite the fact that they have no liquidity. It's the fact that if on a trade sale, 30% of the compensation is put into escrow, that you still have to pay your tax then and there on that 30%, which is really, really kind of punishing. So, but I'd have a similar statement about loads of the tax system.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
the busy stuff that's really sucks a lot of your individual time. You spend a lot of time talking about it, a lot of time worrying about it on a day-to-day grind basis. You know, things like we went through a sharp contraction at some stage in our growth, and we had to make people redundant. And you know, when you make people redundant, you have to pay off redundancy, and the government changed things so that you can't claim back all of the redundancy payments, despite the fact that you're going to the wall, and despite the fact that everyone's paid their PRSI that's supposedly meant to provide it. And that was clawed back. And there's loads of other areas where the boot is put in from taxation at the worst possible moments for companies.
So bringing in new talent is probably one of the biggest obstacles for you, for your growth at the moment. If you could change one thing about the entire environment in Dublin, the recruitment environment, the multinationals, the tax, education, which of those would you try and focus on? Magic wand and fix it.
That's a good question. Well, given the culture in our company, I'd say childcare. That's the biggest thing that we'd focus on. We want to get more talented people into our workforce, and the way that we get more talented people in our workforce is if they're not at home minding their children or having to take time off because one of their kids is sick.
Okay.
Not the answer you're expecting.
No, that wasn't the answer to this question. It's a good one though. Good answer. Okay, I want to wrap up with one question, if you don't mind. You said that during the economic crash, you reduced staff numbers.
Yeah, very painful period.
You had redundancies, and this is exactly my question. What do you do as Caelen on bad days? How do you cope?
So entrepreneurialism in general is fundamentally built on self-delusion.
Can someone tweet that?
And So when there's bad stuff going on, the thing you do is you focus on the good stuff. You try and focus on the good stuff, and then when you have to confront the stuff that's not good, the stats that are clearly telling you otherwise, you always do it too late. You know, I'd love to say that, yeah, you just face up to it and you do it, but the truth is you never face up to it as quickly as you should. You always delude yourself and leave it for too long. And when eventually that you do face up to it, you have to rely on the people you've surrounded yourself with. And so you have to rely on the enthusiasm on other people. And that's a two-way street. When someone else is facing the bad decisions and the tough decisions, you have to. But that's not to say it's people say it a lot, but it is true. It's you know, there's not a lot of people to talk to at times.
So who did you surround yourself with then, outside of the company? I'm putting another question on. I'm sorry, everyone else had their hands up, but I'm sitting here. So who did you surround yourself with?
No, when I say surround yourself, I mean the people you work with.
But did you look externally? Your board, your investors, your family?
Jesus, they don't want me to talk anymore about my business. Christ, if I said another word at the dinner table about my business, Dad, no. The board, particularly, and particularly Paddy Hulme, I'll just go and say it, he's been just a phenomenal board member. He was my first investor. He's given me sound advice from day one. My chair actually has... Actually, all the board is good. I've got to say, all the board is good. I can ring any one of them, and there'll always be a calming influence, and that's been important, especially when you're playing with other people's money. You know, when you're playing with other people's money, there's a sense of responsibility there, and it's good to have calming influences.
Fred, we're going to have to leave it there. I could sit here all evening, but Caelen is going to be around for another little while, so please grab him while he's downstairs, everyone. But I'd like you to put your hands together, please, and thank you.